In episode 16, Han Li, together with 8 others from the Impermanence Alliance, led by Jiao Tam, went to Hongyue Island to assassinate Gongshu Hong. After all kinds of infiltration, ambushes, and extremely fierce frontal assaults, they still ended up letting Gongshu Hong escape. Everyone then followed the developments of the next episode. While Han Li was assessing the people above, a sudden voice transmission sounded in his hand from Jiao 16. "Look, should we capture those people first?" He turned his head and saw that Jiao 9 was also staring ahead with a contemplative expression. He seemed somewhat hesitant, but at this moment the crescent moon in the sky slowly disappeared. The chanting sounds around them immediately began to fade, and they saw the mild-looking old man slowly sweep his gaze across the square, like a high official inspecting the common folk, before gradually opening his mouth and saying, "The Holy Lord bestows grace, granting blessings to all living beings. He bears witness to your sincerity, and you shall enjoy the glory of the heavenly selection." The Jiazi. Heavenly selection is about to begin. Focus your hearts and pray sincerely. The Holy Lord is watching. As soon as he finished speaking, a wave of cheers like mountains collapsing and seas roaring erupted from the crowd. However, it quieted down again after only a short moment. Everyone lightly stroked their chins, faces full of anticipation, hands clasped tightly in front of their bodies as they prayed. Since Han Li and the other 2 were not very clear about what was happening, they also followed suit. At this moment, the square suddenly trembled slightly, as if some ancient formation had been activated. A very strange aura rose up all around. Han Li lowered his head slightly, and blue light flickered in his bright eyes as he looked through the gaps in the crowd down at the ground. He saw that the white stone surface suddenly lit up with countless dense and complex patterns invisible to the naked eye, intertwining and extending in all directions. A low "weng" sound rang out, and several hundred dark red pillars of light suddenly shot up from various places on the ground across the entire square, then descended to envelop certain island residents of Hongyue Island within them. Han Li swept his gaze over them and immediately felt a bit startled. He saw that those who were enveloped showed not the slightest hint of panic. Instead, every one of them had a look of wild joy on their faces. Some were even so happy that they burst into tears, wiping away their tears non-stop. Those around them who knew these people also revealed expressions of delight, while those who did not know them were filled with extreme envy and even a trace of jealousy. Han Li felt somewhat surprised and turned his head to look at Jiao 9 and the others, only to see the same puzzled expressions in their eyes. Clearly, they also did not understand what was going on. After all, among the things they had witnessed earlier in the cities of Hongyue, nothing like this had ever happened. Han Li thought for a moment, as if suddenly recalling something. His eyebrows jumped, and he sent a voice transmission to the other 2. "Could it be that these people are the ones chosen by the Holy Lord? If we stay and follow them, perhaps we can find information about the Moon Dao Master. It's just that we don't know where these people are being taken." Jiao 9 pondered briefly before sending a reply. Han Li smiled and answered, "That's not a problem. I wonder if you've noticed that although the people being teleported include men and women, young and old, and seem to follow no pattern, in fact, that's not the case. These people all appear to be low-level cultivators, or those who possess spiritual roots." Hearing this, Jiao 16 suddenly said, "That's indeed true. Then do you mean we disguise ourselves as low-level cultivators and follow them through the teleportation?" Jiao 9 sent a voice transmission saying, "Exactly. With our cultivation levels, disguising ourselves should be foolproof. I wonder if there will be any other issues." Han Li replied, "If that's the case, the place we're teleported to may have some connection to Gongshu Hong. Should we inform Jiao 8 and the others?" Jiao 16 hesitated slightly and said, "Let's just think of a way to sneak in first. If we discover anything else, we can talk about it then." Jiao Nine replied in a somewhat cold tone. After speaking, Jiao Nine raised his hand to his cheeks and lightly tapped his forehead. An invisible fluctuation immediately rippled out from his body. His appearance did not change at all, but the aura around him rapidly transformed. In the blink of an eye, it became that of mid-stage Foundation establishment. Seeing this, Han Li and the other two followed suit, adjusting their own auras in succession to the Foundation establishment stage. After that, the three of them focused and waited for the red light to rise from beneath their feet. After half a quarter of an hour, red pillars of light continued to light up around them. However, from beginning to end, no pillar of light appeared where Han Li and the others were standing. "Why isn't there any teleportation? Could it be that your judgment was wrong? Or is this Jiazi heavenly selection being carried out at random?" Jiao Nine's expression wavered as he could not help but ask via voice transmission. "Don't be anxious for now. We should wait a bit longer. If the Jiazi heavenly selection ends and we still haven't been teleported, then we can use our divine sense to check a small area." Han Li thought for a moment and replied. After hearing this, Jiao Nine said nothing more, only carefully observing their surroundings several more times. At this moment, a bright light suddenly flared beneath Jiao Nine's feet. A red beam of light abruptly appeared and enveloped him. The gazes of the surrounding people instantly turned toward him. Before he could make any reaction, the light instantly retracted and his figure immediately vanished without a trace. At once, sounds of admiration and praise rose from the surrounding crowd. Everyone's words were filled with extreme envy, mixed with a faint sense of regret for themselves. But before the surrounding noise could settle down, two more red beams of light suddenly lit up. With a flash, they carried away the two people who had been standing there, none other than Han Li and Jiao 16. Han Li only felt the light and shadows around him spin for a moment. His body swayed uncontrollably in midair before returning once more to reality. He looked around and discovered countless people standing crowded together beside him. Not far from him stood Jiao 16, whose face was full of confusion. As for Jiao 9, he could not be seen for the time being. The place they were now standing in was an extremely vast location, inside an enormous palace. In all directions, people were everywhere, and it was impossible to see the walls of the underground palace. One could only look up at the ceiling and at the massive white stone pillars surrounding them, like clusters of giant trees. Hanging above were huge braziers, inside which something unknown was burning. There was not the slightest bit of smoke rising, only crimson flames leaping and writhing non-stop. At the same time, red light continued to flash all around, wave after wave. Mortals and low-level cultivators were being transported here in batches. Compared to the solemn atmosphere on the square above, this place was somewhat noisy. Everyone who had been teleported here was unable to restrain themselves, their faces filled with excitement as their shoulders trembled, and they stood on tiptoe to look around. Around Han Li, aside from a few Foundation establishment and chi refining cultivators, the rest were all mortals. Being suddenly teleported here naturally felt like a miracle to them. One by one, they became even more devout, continuously chanting in low voices. The various pleading sounds merged together and echoed endlessly throughout the underground palace, producing an unceasing weng-weng sound. Han Li listened for a while, and for some reason deep in his heart, he felt a faint sense of oppressive pressure. However, this feeling did not last long and quickly disappeared. The surrounding air was somewhat murky, carrying a faint smell of fresh blood that did not dissipate. He sniffed lightly and glanced down at the bluish stone beneath his feet. He discovered that the top thin layer had almost turned black, while the rest gradually transitioned into a pale red, as if it had been soaked in fresh blood year-round to form such a color. Seeing this scene, Han Li could not help but recall the discovery of yin earth beneath the stone slabs in the underground palace of Hongyue City in Lanzhou, and his brows immediately furrowed. At this moment, Zhao 16 struggled through the sea of people to reach Han Li's side and asked in a lowered voice, "So, have you discovered anything?" There seemed to be some clues, but it's still impossible to be certain. "How about we first go find Taoist Zhao 9 and talk after that?" Han Li shook his head and said. After speaking, he sent a voice transmission to Zhao 9 to ask about his location. After some exchanges, he learned that Zhao 9 had been teleported to a place not close to Han Li and the others, near the center of this underground palace. Therefore, Han Li and the other two ignored the noisy chanting crowd and quietly moved toward the center of the palace. Along the way, their movement drew complaints and reproaches from some people. The closer they got to the center of the underground palace, the more strongly Han Li could smell the stench of blood. The black stone slabs beneath their feet also grew darker and darker. By the time he neared the center of the underground palace, the color of the stone beneath them had become almost purple. Han Li raised his head slightly and saw a solemn statue, 3 zhang tall, standing ahead, none other than Gongshu Hong, the island lord of Hongyue Island. Near the statue was a stone platform about 10 zhang in circumference, raised slightly above the ground. The top was empty, and standing nearby was a sturdy man who was not very tall. He wore a purple robe, with a blood moon pattern embroidered on his chest. His eyes were half closed, hiding most of the sharp light within them, and his aura was steady and fully restrained. He was a low-key, deeply reserved, loose immortal. Han Li and Zhao 16 stopped at the boundary of that area. They watched the distant loose immortal for a moment, then turned their gaze to the statue. In the crowd, someone was pushing forward, revealing half his body. It was Zhao 9. He had clearly seen Han Li and the other, and was about to hurry over to them when he suddenly saw the loose immortal lift his head. His gaze swept from left to right across the surroundings. After a moment, the short, burly man withdrew his eyes, looked forward, and spoke. The moment his voice rang out, all the noisy clamor around them abruptly fell silent. The entire underground palace became extremely quiet. Everyone's eyes turned toward the burly man, and the air instantly grew tense. Seeing this, Zhao 9 also stopped and looked toward the loose immortal. The loose immortal said, "The heavenly selection ritual has ended. All of you here, because you sincerely worship the Holy Lord, have been favored by him, and thus you are able to obtain the supreme glory." The short man spoke loudly. Hearing this, everyone immediately became overjoyed and could not help cheering. Han Li swept his eyes around and saw that in the underground palace, the red light indeed no longer flashed, and no one was being teleported in anymore. The short man raised both hands before him and pressed downward a few times in the air, and the cheers gradually died down. The underground palace became quiet once again. The short man then spoke again. "The Holy Lord is benevolent and willing to open the immortal gate. He will decide among you who has immortal fate and outstanding talent, to transmit immortal cultivation's secret arts, and keep them as attendants by his side. You must pray sincerely, so that the Holy Lord may descend." Hearing this, everyone in the hall clasped their hands before their chests and shut their eyes tightly, assuming the posture of prayer. After hearing it, Zhao 16 immediately showed delight and sent a voice transmission to Han Li and Zhao 9. "Fellow Taoists, since we already know Gongshu Hong is about to descend here, should we immediately send a voice transmission to Lord Zhao Tam?" Hearing this, Han Li's gaze sharpened. He looked toward Zhao 9 across from him and saw hesitation on the other's face. At that moment, the statue in the middle of the underground palace suddenly shook violently, and 2 blood-red lights lit up in its eyes. Seeing this, Han Li and the others also turned their eyes toward the statue. "Welcome the Holy Lord's descent!" The short man turned toward the statue and bowed deeply in extreme reverence. Seeing this, everyone immediately followed. The short man bowed deeply once more, murmuring, "Welcome the Holy Lord's descent." Han Li also bent slightly at the waist, his eyes alternating between observing the statue and the ugly-looking short man. He saw the short man forming hand seals in front of his body, his lips moving non-stop, as if silently chanting something. Behind the crowd, the blood-red light in the statue's eyes suddenly flashed and directly turned into two pink-red pillars of light that shot forward. "Ka, ka, ka!" As the statue slowly rotated, the two blood-red pillars of light continuously swept across the crowd in the underground palace. This place was the same as the underground palaces in other Donghua cities. The smell of blood had condensed and would not disperse. Yin earth had already formed on the ground. It was clearly a murderous place that slaughtered living beings year-round. And the people brought into this underground palace, aside from cultivators, were mortals with spiritual roots and abundant qi and blood. They would most likely be turned into sacrificial offerings for a blood sacrifice. Han Li's expression turned solemn as he spoke while explaining, "Gongshu Hong cultivates the laws of blood. Could it be that this method is actually this evil, requiring the blood essence of living beings to cultivate?" Zhao 16 said in surprise, "If that's truly the case, then why don't they immediately initiate the blood sacrifice? Why do they still have to conduct another round of screening and selection?" Zhao 9 asked, with some doubt. Han Li inferred and replied, "The reason they first select those with top-grade cultivation aptitude is to nurture them into high-level cultivators, dress them in red robes, and let Gongshu Hong use them. Also, to prevent these people from leaking secrets, they should place some kind of restriction on their souls. As for the rest, I'm afraid that once the selection process ends, that will be when the sacrifice begins." Zhao 9 glanced at that short, loose immortal and sent a voice transmission. "Judging by this, there should still be some time, enough for us to seize this person and leave this place." Just as Zhao 9 finished speaking, the surrounding space suddenly emitted a violent whoosh-whoosh sound. A bizarre scene appeared. Blood-colored patterns suddenly emerged across the surrounding walls, spreading everywhere like a spider web. These patterns rapidly expanded, and in no time they covered all the walls around them. Several blood-colored patterns flickered like blossoms in bloom, revealing many vague, blood-light eyes that seemed alive, constantly wriggling. They looked extremely eerie and made one's skin crawl. Under their illumination, everyone's faces turned ruddy, and the air inside the underground palace was filled with an extremely thick stench of blood. Underground, seeing what was happening before their eyes, many people began to show fear. Zhao 9's mouth moved slightly as if he was about to say something, but then another weng sounded around them. Those red eyes suddenly blazed with light, and dense streaks of blood-colored radiance shot out like rain from those eyes, covering the entire underground space. There was simply nowhere to escape. Each streak of bloodlight radiated wave after wave of unclear law fluctuations. The three of them were shocked. Although they did not know what this bloodlight was, it was clearly something that would not benefit them. Han Li made a swift decision and immediately moved with a single thought. A shimmering layer of light appeared over the surface of his entire body. At the same time, he waved his hand and summoned a golden mirror and a blue ruyi. Two flashes of golden and blue light followed, then covered his body. Those two treasures were the spoils he had taken from Tu Ha, a great ascension cultivator of the Hangsing race. After killing the other party, he had refined them once, and they had become protective treasures for his body. Zhao 9 reacted extremely quickly as well. He formed hand seals, and ripples of blue water appeared around him, wrapping his body layer after layer and protecting him completely. Zhao 16 immediately flicked his hand, summoning a large blue axe that spun above his head. Brilliant green light fell from the axe blade, forming a green sphere of light that enveloped his entire body. How could it be like this again? The time clearly hasn't arrived yet. The short, loose Immortal stared at the blood-red eyes that had appeared in all directions at lightning speed, and a trace of shock flashed in his eyes. All around, countless streaks of bloodlight shot toward them. His body trembled, as if he was somewhat afraid of this bloodlight. He opened his mouth and spat out a blood bead. The blood bead spun rapidly, then suddenly turned into a dark red cage of light that covered his body. The bloodlight flying out from within those red eyes was unbelievably fast. In the blink of an eye, it struck the bodies of everyone in the underground space. The radiance of the protective treasures covering Han Li and the others suddenly rang out with a loud, hollow boom. The bloodlight flashed once and easily pierced through all layers of their defenses, directly burrowing into their bodies. Han Li's expression changed drastically. He immediately urged his divine sense to spread throughout his entire body. Yet what was eerie was that after the blood-red light drilled into his body, it vanished without a trace, leaving him unable to find it anywhere, causing his heart to grow tense. Bang, 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 bang. At that very moment, a strange vibration suddenly echoed beside Han Li's ears. For some unknown reason, his heart suddenly became uncontrollable, pounding wildly, with a tendency to beat faster and faster. The blood within his body also began to flow several times faster. The meridians throughout his body became extremely taut, and even the magical power in his dantian was affected by the rapid heartbeat and began to grow unstable. Zhao 9 and Zhao 16 also cried out in alarm, clearly experiencing the same situation as Han Li. "What is going on? I feel terrible. I can't take it anymore." Dull thudding sounds mixed with miserable screams rang out one after another from all directions. Han Li and the others looked up and saw that the mortals and low-level cultivators around them who had been struck by the blood-red light had their skin instantly turned blood-red all over, their bodies trembling non-stop. With a loud bang, their bodies abruptly swelled, then exploded directly, turning into showers of thick, sticky blood rain. In just a few breaths, several 100,000 people in the space had all exploded, transforming into countless curtains of blood rain that covered the entire ground. Those red eyes shifted, and the blood rain within the space rapidly converged, forming layers of blood clouds. The underground space, which had originally been crowded, now became desolate, and the view opened up. At a spot some distance away from Han Li and the other two, 4 figures were still standing upright, all enveloped in a layer of radiance. It was Zhao 8's group, who had somehow slipped in at an unknown time. Seeing this, Zhao 9 and Zhao 16 felt a slight sense of joy. No matter what, encountering companions amid such a bizarre situation was always somewhat uplifting. With 7 true immortals joining forces, there would surely be a way to resolve the predicament before them. Han Li's gaze quickly swept over the blood clouds in the sky, and his heart sank. Green light flared brightly around his body as he exerted himself to circulate the magical power within, while simultaneously employing several secret techniques in an attempt to disperse the abnormal changes inside his body. Unfortunately, no matter what methods he used, he was unable to make the slightest improvement to the condition within. His heartbeat grew faster and faster. An invisible force churned inside his body, pressing toward the center where his heart was located. At the same time, his body was subjected to another force pushing outward, rapidly causing it to swell. A strange, blood-red sheen appeared on his skin, though the color was extremely faint. Han Li's heart stirred, and scenes of the mortals and low-level cultivators exploding earlier involuntarily surfaced in his mind. At the same time, Zhao 9 and Zhao 16, and even Zhao 8's group in the distance, now also displayed the same strange blood-red sheen on their skin. What drew their attention, however, was that the short, burly man in the purple robe on the high platform was also experiencing a similar situation. His expression was ferocious and tinged with pain, but at this moment none of them had the leisure to worry about him. By now the situation was clear. They believed they had successfully infiltrated the place, but in truth, They had long since been discovered by Gongshu Hong, who had simply played along and trapped them in this underground space. And in order not to leave behind any traces, the other side was even willing to sacrifice the loose Immortal under his command. As Han Li was pondering this, the red eyes around them continued to rotate, and streaks of blood-red light kept shooting out. Although everyone did their utmost to evade, they were still repeatedly struck by the blood-red light. Every time it invaded their bodies, a strange law force would follow, causing their heartbeats to suddenly accelerate. In the span of a few breaths, expressions of pain appeared on everyone's faces. The hearts in their chests thundered like rolling thunder, as if they were about to leap out of their bodies. Among the seven, Han Li's situation appeared to be the best. He had successfully cultivated the true extremity body, making his entire body indestructible, and his heart was no exception, far tougher than that of ordinary cultivators. Although his heart was beating faster and faster, he could still endure it. Jiao Nine's expression turned gloomy. At this point, he no longer bothered to conceal his own magical power. He muttered a few words under his breath, and countless densely packed blue talisman runes shot out from his body, interweaving to form an extremely thin protective barrier. Although this barrier looked fragile, waves of watery light flowed across its surface, radiating intense fluctuations of water law power. The surrounding blood-red light streaked toward the blue barrier. Although it could still easily penetrate through, it was clearly being significantly weakened. So that's how it is. Law power. Only law power can block it. Seeing this, Han Li thought silently to himself. Han Li and Jiao Nine seemed to be safe for the time being, but Jiao 16's condition was far worse. At this moment, Jiao 16 had exhausted all his methods, yet several strands of blood-red light still invaded his body. His body slightly bulged, his skin turning bright blood red, while blood continuously poured out from his facial features. This place is not suitable to stay in for long. First, we need to find a way to leave here, Jiao Nine shouted in a deep voice. The blue light around his body transformed into escaping radiance as he shot straight up into the sky. Jiao 16 did not hesitate and immediately followed. Although Han Li was the least affected by the blood-red light, this place was truly too bizarre. Naturally, he had no desire to stay and be schemed against, so he followed at once. Jiao 8's group in the distance clearly had the same thought. They all transformed into escaping light and flew together. In mid-air, Jiao 9 fiercely swung his arm, sending out a blue water-flying blade. It flashed once, then transformed into a gigantic blade more than 10 zhang long, emitting a booming wind and thunder sound as it viciously slashed toward the top of the underground space. Just as the enormous blue blade struck the underground spatial wall, a sudden change occurred. A vast curtain of blood-red light abruptly appeared on the wall, forming a red light screen that contained countless faintly shifting runes within. A loud clang rang out. The giant blue blade felt as though it had struck metal rather than stone. The red light screen remained completely unscathed, standing firm as a mountain. Jiao Nine's expression changed. Boom! At that moment, an earth-shaking roar sounded. A black, three-pronged hammer wrapped in a layer of light flew out from a spot right beside Jiao 16. A trace of resolve flashed in Jiao 16's eyes. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of essence blood, which flashed once, and then entered the black hammer, disappearing. The black hammer immediately blazed with brilliant light and began spinning rapidly. Countless tiny runes appeared on its surface, while black lightning like coiling serpents wrapped around the hammer, releasing thunderous roars that shook the heavens. Wherever the black lightning passed, the void violently trembled, even revealing black cracks. Jiao 16 pointed forward with a finger. The three-pronged black hammer let out a deafening explosion as it rapidly shot out a streak of black lightning, viciously striking the red light screen above. At the same time, under Jiao Nine's forceful urging of his incantations, runes appeared on the surface of the long blue blade, and its radiance grew dazzling. At the same time, Han Li's fists transformed into countless afterimages, which also rapidly struck the red light screen. Thunderous explosions rang out around the screen. The radiance barrier caved inward deeply, yet there was not the slightest sign that it was about to break. At this moment, the blood-colored patterns on the surrounding walls suddenly emitted brilliant blood light, accompanied by strange clacking sounds. The massive blood cloud abruptly churned, then split into strands of blood mist that swept in all directions, being sucked into the walls by the blood-colored patterns like whales drawing in water. In the blink of an eye, the blood clouds filling the sky vanished without a trace. The underground space became even more desolate. The blood-colored patterns on the walls suddenly grew several times thicker and larger than before. Those eerie red eyes also swelled several times in size, appearing as though they were glaring fiercely, ferocious, and terrifying. What surprised Han Li and the others was that the red light screen blocking the stone wall at the top also became even sturdier. The spot where the three of them had struck together, which had caved in, now emitted even more dazzling blood light. A bang rang out. The three-pronged black hammer and the blue long blade were both blasted back. Han Li was also jolted by the rebound force, his body swaying. A hint of fear flashed in his eyes. Before they could do anything else, the red eyes on all sides released an enormous blood glow. In an instant, the blinding blood-red radiance covered the entire underground space, turning it once again into a blood-red world. Thump, thump. Han Li frowned. He could clearly sense a surge of law power far stronger than before, continuously pouring into his body through the blood light, making his heartbeat suddenly speed up several times over. Even with a body as tough as his, he felt as if he could barely endure it. Han Li cried out in pain and immediately went all out to circulate the Little Northern Dipper Star origin art. On his upper body, a pattern of 7 points of starlight appeared. A layer of starlight enveloped him, and all the bones and muscles in his body instantly became as hard as iron. A layer of starlight also appeared around his heart, finally slowing his heartbeat somewhat. Jiao Nine's face had long since gone completely pale. Without saying a word, he formed hand seals with both hands. The watery blue light around him flickered, and a streak of black light flew out from within his body, rapidly expanding into an old man in a black robe, completely shrouded in dazzling watery blue radiance. Within that blue radiance, countless blue talisman runes vibrated, releasing wave after wave of intense law power. Jiao Nine formed another series of hand seals, then flicked his hand and cast a technique. The blue radiance surrounding the black-robed old man immediately shot out and merged back into Jiao Nine's body. The blue light around Jiao Nine surged, and the law power formed a protective ring several times brighter, blocking the bloodlight that was eroding in from all sides. Among the three, Jiao 16 did not possess a powerful body like Han Li's, nor was he a loose immortal, and he had no way to use law power to protect his body. When the violent strands of bloodlight poured down around him, his face instantly turned deathly pale. A stream of law power crazily surged into his body without stop, transforming into a sinister force that slammed fiercely into his heart. His heart began to race frantically, until a dull pop sounded from within his chest. Jiao 16 spat blood again and again, mixed with fragments of internal organs. With a heavy thud, his body fell to the ground. The light on the three-pronged black hammer suddenly vanished, and with a clang, the black hammer dropped onto the ground. Jiao 16's eyes were filled with unwillingness. He reached forward as if trying to grasp something, but his body suddenly swelled as if being inflated. With a boom, his body exploded into a vast curtain of exquisitely vivid blood mist, releasing terrifying spiritual power fluctuations. The nascent soul within his body did not have time to escape. It was corroded by that blood law power and also exploded, utterly destroyed. The blood mist that had just formed seemed to be controlled by someone. The moment it appeared, it churned briefly, then split into dozens of portions, drilling into the surrounding walls and disappearing, just like the earlier blood clouds that had been absorbed by the walls. This sudden change happened in the blink of an eye. After the surrounding walls absorbed Jiao 16's blood mist, the law power filling the space immediately became even stronger. Han Li suddenly heard the thump-thump of a heartbeat echoing by his ears again. Though startled, he still took a deep breath and then closed his eyes. He had chosen the path of the origin immortal for cultivation and had studied matters of the body extremely thoroughly. The heart was the foundation of the human body. Naturally, he understood it deeply, and what was strange here was that the heartbeat sound was absolutely not simply pounding once and then suddenly accelerating. There had to be some kind of rule hidden within it. Just now, at the instant Jiao 16's body exploded, it seemed he had vaguely realized something. On the other hand, after Jiao 16 died, fresh blood suddenly flowed from Jiao 9's nose and mouth, and his face grew paler and paler. Jiao 9 also realized that the blood law power around them had suddenly become stronger, and it was very likely connected to Jiao 16's death. But today, he had already withdrawn his Earth-grade incarnation, bringing faith power and law power back into his body. Even so, there was still no way to stop the strange law power within the bloodlight. Thump, thump. He could feel that his heartbeat speed was almost at the absolute limit his body could withstand. "I absolutely refuse to accept this," Jiao 9 roared inside. Unfortunately, he had the will, but not the strength. He could not even speak a word aloud. He could only watch helplessly as the law light protecting his body gradually dimmed, and despair appeared in his eyes. Suddenly, a fist appeared out of nowhere, piercing straight through the protective ring around his body and striking his back, right where his heart was. A stream of fist force seeped into his body and immediately took effect on his heart. This fist force was extremely subtle, rising and falling like soft cotton. In an instant, his heartbeat returned to normal. Then that fist force violently struck at the strange law power within his body, causing more than half of it to dissipate at once. Pfft! Jiao 9 opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of fresh blood, and his complexion returned to normal. He turned his head and saw that Han Li had somehow appeared behind him and was slowly withdrawing his arm. Jiao 9 was astonished. Although he did not understand why a single punch from Han Li could dispel the erosion of law power, he was still grateful and gave Han Li a slight nod. At this moment, for some unknown reason, the red eyes on the walls began to slowly close. The blood light filling the underground space also rapidly faded. However, the remaining blood-colored patterns on the stone wall still remained, not dispersing. Han Li and Jiao 9's heartbeats returned to normal. The two of them let out a long breath, but it felt as if they had lived through several lifetimes. In the distance, a figure was falling from the sky. From the shape of his body, it was actually Jiao 8. At this moment, he was drenched in blood and looked rather miserable, clearly having suffered severe damage to his vital energy. Yet he had been able to resist the violent invasion of the blood law power, which meant he had some understanding of law power as well, and it was somewhat special. Apart from the three of them, no one else in this enormous underground space had survived. The air was filled with a nauseating stench of blood. Just now they had been focused on saving themselves, with no time to observe what was happening around them. They also had not paid close attention to what had happened to Jiao 8's group. It seemed those four had also exhausted every method to try to break out of this space, but unfortunately without success. In the end, only Jiao 8 remained alive, while the other three must have died. In other words, after this battle, 4 true immortal-level cultivators had died on the spot. One could even say their bodies and souls were completely destroyed. Besides that, The short, burly man in the purple robe who had stood on the high platform at the center of that blood-colored space had also vanished without a trace. Where he had stood, only a large, blood-red staff remained, its spiritual light dim, standing lonely and upright in the ground. Han Li felt no joy at all at the purple-robed man's death. On the contrary, his brows were still tightly furrowed. The one who had set this trap was Gongshu Hong, the island master of Hongyue Island. This person was indeed ruthless and merciless. In order to lure Han Li and the others here, he had been willing to sacrifice a loose immortal under his command. That meant he had intended from the start to kill all of them. Han Li's thoughts raced. He took out some medicinal pills and swallowed them, quickly circulating his cultivation to refine them. He did not believe the other side would let them go so easily. Jiao 15, thank you for saving my life. Just now, I was deeply grateful. At this moment, Jiao 9 also swallowed several pills in one breath, then hurriedly clasped his hands toward Han Li and expressed his thanks. As he spoke, he raised one hand, and the black-robed old man standing beside him rapidly shrank, turning into a streak of black light that plunged back into his body. When facing danger, it is only right that we help one another. Fellow Taoist, Jiao 9 need not be so polite, Han Li said calmly, his expression unchanged. He had clearly noticed when the other party released the Earth-grade incarnation earlier. Not only did he recognize that incarnation, he had even fought against it before. It was the incarnation of ancestor Lu Kun, who had once gone to Black Mist Island together with Han Q. He had not expected that this person was actually a long-standing member of the Impermanence Alliance, and that it would be such a coincidence for them to be carrying out a mission together. At this time, Jiao 8 also flew over from afar and arrived beside Han Li and Jiao 9. He clasped his hands toward the two of them, a bitter smile appearing on his face as he said, "It seems we were a step too slow and were outmaneuvered by Gongshu Hong. For Gongshu Hong to cultivate such an evil technique and slaughter countless cultivators and mortals, he truly is insane." Jiao 9 said harshly, "You two, we still haven't escaped danger yet. We should first think of a way to leave this place." Han Li swept his gaze around and spoke slowly. As soon as he finished speaking, a strange, rasping laugh rang out. "Heh heh. I didn't expect the three of you to still be alive. The Impermanence Alliance truly is a place where hidden dragons and crouching tigers lie." Immediately afterward, at the high platform in the space, a thunderous boom sounded. The platform collapsed and shattered, revealing a large cavern. A mass of blood clouds shot out from within, flickered slightly, then vanished, and three figures appeared. One of them was the purple-robed old man who had ambushed Han Li in Tianshui City. Of the other two, one wore a purple robe patterned with a blood moon, a robust middle-aged man with a strong build, a hat on his head, and eyes flashing with sharp light. The last was a woman in a black dress, fat-bodied, with flat features and skin black as soot, extremely ugly overall. The auras emitted by all three were at the true immortal level. Among them, the strongest aura belonged to the hat-wearing middle-aged man. The other two clearly regarded him as their leader. The hat-wearing man's gloomy gaze swept over Han Li and the others, a cold smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. Back in Tianshui City, it was this kid who broke my blood-mang space. At the time, I thought it was just a coincidence. But now it seems this fellow really is somewhat strange. The purple-robed old man narrowed his eyes and pointed at Han Li as he spoke. "Chiu Wu, it seems you're interested in him. Then we'll leave him to you. We'll deal with the other two," the woman in the black dress said in a hoarse voice. "Just what I wanted," Chiu Wu said with a sinister laugh. While the three hat-wearing men were dividing up their opponents, Han Li's side was also observing them, their expressions cold and grave. The other side consisted of 3 loose immortals at the early true immortal stage. Logically speaking, their strength was inferior to Han Li's group, but now, aside from Han Li, the other 2 were both seriously injured. If they fought desperately at this moment, it would likely be difficult to escape immediately. It seemed these 3 were precisely Gongshu Hong's loose immortal subordinates. Jiao 8 licked his lips and transmitted a message to Han Li and Jiao 9. This place is extremely strange. I'm afraid something bad may happen soon. Han Li glanced at the faint blood-colored patterns on the stone walls and replied via voice transmission. We must fight quickly and decisively. Don't hold anything back. Jiao 9 took a deep breath and spoke. Before his words had even fallen, the 3 enemies had already charged over. Without any obvious movements from them, the space before Han Li's group trembled, and hundreds of blood-colored light blades appeared, surging toward the 3 of them. Seeing this, Han Li's eyes lit up. He quickly retreated half a step, drew his fists to his waist to gather strength, then struck out. A surge of brute force erupted, colliding with the light blades and producing sounds like rain striking roof tiles. However, the light blades only paused briefly before suddenly exploding, transforming into countless blood-red threads that quickly dissipated. Before the light screen had even dispersed, the 3 led by Chu Wu had already rushed forward, charging at their opponents. Seeing the hat-wearing man rushing toward him, Jiao 8's expression darkened. He hurriedly formed hand seals, and despite the injuries on his body, a streak of green light flew out from around him, transforming into a thin man in white robes who stood beside him. This man looked quite similar to Jiao 8, except his skin was emerald green and his body was shrouded in a layer of green radiance. It was his Earth-grade incarnation. As soon as the incarnation appeared, it leapt in front of Jiao 8, bent slightly, and took a deep breath. Immediately afterward, violent winds surged forth. Countless streams of white airflow roared upward, forming a white vortex that poured into the incarnation's mouth, causing its belly to swell. A moment later, it opened its mouth, and with a loud boom, a stream of green air blasted out, transforming into a green dragon that bared its fangs and claws as it flew forth. Seeing this, the hat-wearing man merely snorted coldly. Without even gathering power, he raised his hand and struck forward. A pair of bone-white gauntlets appeared over his fists. At the same time, a ghost-shaped fist image flew out from the radiance, meeting the oncoming dragon head-on. A tremendous crash rang out as the dragon and the evil ghost collided directly. Countless wind blades shot out in all directions, sharp bang, bang, bang sounds echoing endlessly within the underground palace. The ground, walls, and stone pillars were like tofu, riddled with deep holes by the wind blades. After throwing that punch, a faint layer of bloodlight appeared over the hat-wearing man's body. Without dodging, he charged straight into the dense storm of wind blades and continued rushing toward Jiao 8. When the wind blades struck the bloodlight around him, puff-puff sounds rang out, but they could not penetrate it in the slightest. Jiao 8 clenched his teeth and commanded his Earth-grade incarnation to leap forward to meet him. On the other side, the woman in the black dress collided violently with a staff shadow in mid-air. Thick, black smoke wrapped around her body as she retreated backward, then lightly descended. But before her feet could firmly touch the ground, her brows suddenly furrowed. A black light flashed in the void beneath her feet, and a black mist lotus abruptly appeared. Without a care, she stepped forcefully on the black lotus and leapt away to another spot. At the place where she had originally intended to land, blood surged and suddenly churned violently. A black-clad figure appeared, holding a blue water sword. It was Lu Kun's Earth-grade incarnation. Lu Kun's ambush failed to achieve its effect, and his expression sank. He summoned his black-robed old man incarnation and revealed his true body, launching an attack toward the woman in the black dress not far away. Qiu Wu's gaze turned toward Han Li as he said coldly, "Kid, Last time I noticed you, I knew you weren't simple. I didn't expect you to be a mystic immortal either. Just in time, my blood puppet refining is lacking a suitable body. Your true extremity body is perfectly suited. Han Li looked at him, curled his lips without replying, and merely raised his hand slightly, clenching it into a fist. Seeing this, the purple-robed old man's eyelids twitched violently, and killing intent in his eyes instantly turned icy cold. He flipped his palm, and black light immediately flashed in his hand, revealing a round purple-black bowl. Inside, red light flickered and churned endlessly, as if it were filled with thick, fresh blood. A chanting sound came from Chiu Wu's mouth, causing the red light within the bowl to intensify at once. At first, the blood merely rippled slightly, but now it boiled madly. Looking closely, one could see that as the fresh blood surged up, it seemed to reveal countless struggling, wailing, ghostly faces, desperately seeking an exit from the bowl, as if trying to escape. "Rise!" Chiu Wu shouted softly. The light above the bowl instantly blazed forth, pouring out its full power to form a vast mass of blood in midair, covering 100 jang radius. It turned into overwhelming waves of blood that swept toward Han Li, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. An extremely foul stench instantly spread out, while countless miserable wails echoed without end. Yin energy surged violently in the surroundings, as if the netherworld had descended, as though all the cultivators and mortals who had died here had returned as vengeful spirits, forcibly releasing their resentment and killing intent. Sensing that thick stench of blood and the aura of resentful souls, Han Li's brows could not help but knit slightly. He flicked his wrist, and a golden round mirror flew out before him. The mirror surface gleamed as it released a swath of golden light, forming a circular light screen that covered the area around him. Ahead, the surging blood waves crashed down in layers onto the light screen. With a loud boom, the golden screen shuddered, then steadied. But in the next moment, the blood waves smeared across its surface, producing sizzling hiss-hiss sounds as large amounts of white vapor rose, as if a lake were being brought to a boil. The golden mirror hovering in mid-air also began to tremble non-stop. With a crisp clang, the mirror shattered, losing all spiritual light as it fell to the ground. The golden light screen vanished along with it, no longer able to block the blood waves. The violent blood tide immediately surged forward like a massive sphere, completely engulfing Han Li. Han Li only saw blood light flash before his eyes. In an instant, he fell into a vast sea of blood, extremely thick and sticky, so that his body immediately came under tremendous pressure. Moreover, while submerged in the blood, the layer of radiance from his true extremity body still emitted a faint glow, yet he could clearly feel that this light membrane was being continuously invaded by an extremely tiny but incredibly sharp force. Within the blood sea around him, ferocious figures suddenly appeared, moving back and forth as they searched. Regardless of whether they were old or young, male or female, they all now wore vicious, savage expressions, bearing fangs and claws as they rushed in to bite and tear at his body. Han Li shouted softly and swung both hands. In a brief blur, countless overlapping fist shadows appeared, striking toward over 100 human figures all around him. At the same time, streaks of golden scales emerged around his body. He shot forward through the air, trying with all his might to break out of the blood pool. "Still want to run? Keep dreaming!" Chiu Wu shouted when he saw this. Bloodlight flashed in his hand as he struck the round bowl. Immediately, densely packed runes billowed out, swarming to bind Han Li within the sea of blood. Han Li only felt the blood pool around him rumble violently, rapidly spinning in one direction. The heat rose sharply like water coming to a boil. In only a short while, the temperature in the blood pool was already comparable to scorching magma. Han Li's figure shook violently within the boiling blood vortex, and the skin and golden scales outside his body turned bright red. The pulling force of the blood pool increased several times over, leaving him unable to break free for the moment. His expression sank. With a wave of his hand, a clear cry immediately rang out. The Starflame Firebird flew out from within his body, transforming into silver flames that wrapped around him. With that silver flame barrier in place, the searing blood could not approach him by even half a step. In fact, the temperature of the silver flames caused the blood around Han Li to evaporate rapidly. In only a brief moment, a vacuum ring formed right beside him, and the pulling force nearly vanished. "There's no time to waste on you," Han Li said in a deep voice. His figure immediately surged upward. The thick, scorching blood that touched the protective layer formed by the Starflame Firebird scattered in all directions. In the next moment, he shot up from the blood vortex. Then, without another word, he swung his arm and viciously threw a punch toward Chu Wu. Alarmed, Chu Wu hurriedly used both hands to activate a technique. Before him, the round bowl instantly expanded several times, the runes on its surface lighting up clearly as rings of black radiance spread out, forming a barrier in front of him. "Rumble!" A tremendous sound rang out. The black radiance before the purple-robed old man collided with the descending fist shadow and exploded on the spot, turning into countless fragments that scattered in all directions. The light on the black bowl immediately dimmed, spiderweb-like cracks appearing across it before it shrank back to its original size. Chu Wu's chest and abdomen shook violently. He let out an uncomfortable grunt as a trace of fresh blood seeped from the corner of his mouth. He withdrew the bowl, his hand trembling slightly as he touched the cracks on its surface, his eyes filled with shock. "How can this be?" Before Chu Wu could finish speaking, a sharp cry suddenly rang out. A silver firebird, dragging a long tail of flame, shot toward him like an arrow. Seeing the silver firebird appear, Chu Wu revealed panic. But with things already at this point, he could only grit his teeth and spit 3 mouthfuls of essence blood into the bowl in his hand. The essence blood stuck to the bowl's surface and was absorbed completely, not a drop left behind. At once, the bowl vibrated with a weng-weng sound. The bloodlight beneath it surged as rings of runes rose up. A pillar of blood gradually formed, and from within it charged out a flood dragon. The instant the blood flood dragon burst from the pillar, it opened its mouth and spat out a waterfall-like stream of blood, transforming into a rolling blood surge that swept toward the silver firebird. The thick blood tide was mixed with strands of black qi, releasing a terrifying, nauseating stench. Seeing this, the silver firebird did not slow down at all. It lightly flapped its wings. Silver light flashed around its body, producing countless silver fireballs that charged straight into the oncoming blood tide. Puff, puff! Several huge explosions rang out. Each silver fireball that fell into the blood tide detonated, spreading into a vast swath of silver flames that surged outward. Wherever the silver flames spread, sizzling hiss-hiss sounds erupted. More than half of the blood tide was evaporated into wisps of white smoke by the fireballs. In the blink of an eye, the blood tide was riddled like a honeycomb. At its center, the silver flames tore open a massive hole more than 30 zhang wide. The silver firebird turned into a streak of silver light and shot through the opening, charging straight toward Chu Wu standing behind it. Seeing this, Chu Wu suddenly clenched his teeth, and his 10 fingers moved rapidly in hand seals. The blood radiance around his body flared, and one could vaguely see countless glittering runes appearing within it. The blood flood dragon surged forward, charging at the silver firebird. A startled look flashed in Han Li's eyes, as if he had thought of something. He hurriedly urged his incantation, wanting to recall the firebird. But at that exact moment, the runes on the surface of the blood flood dragon shone brighter and brighter, then suddenly exploded, turning into a vast curtain of blood mist that happened to envelop the silver firebird before it could return. Immediately afterward, a clear cry came from within the blood mist. A silver fireball shot out, transforming back into the silver firebird as it sped toward Han Li. The firebird now looked somewhat dim, with quite a bit of blood mist clinging to its exterior, clearly having been significantly affected by the blood flood dragon's self-detonation. Han Li formed a hand seal, causing the blood mist stuck to the firebird to evaporate cleanly. Then he let the firebird fly into his sleeve, disappearing from sight. The enemy's summoned blood flood dragon had contained a trace of law power within it, carrying an extremely strong ability to corrode spirituality. Fortunately, he had decided quickly to recall the firebird. Otherwise, its spirituality would likely have suffered considerable damage. Chu Wu's face was now somewhat pale, clearly showing that his earlier spell casting had greatly consumed his vital energy. Seeing that Han Li was still completely unharmed, malice appeared in Chu Wu's eyes. Then a scene that made one's scalp go numb suddenly unfolded. He tore open his robe with both hands, revealing his abdomen, which had been pierced through by a long hole. Flesh and skin contracted, making the hole grow larger and larger. The purple bowl emitted fierce dark light, as if resonating. It flashed once and flew straight into that hole. At the same time, the blood mist formed by the blood flood dragon's self-detonation, along with the earlier blood tide, roared back in reverse. All of it poured into the hole in his abdomen and merged into Chu Wu's body. His figure grew taller. His pupils vanished, replaced by 2 red gemstones. His clothes were completely crushed, and layers of red scales grew over his skin. In only an instant, Chu Wu had transformed into a blood-red giant 7 or 8 zhang tall, his entire body glossy and gleaming. Han Li narrowed his eyes. Instead of retreating, he advanced, charging straight toward the giant Chu Wu. The blood crystal giant let out a strange, rasping laugh and raised his hand, slapping a palm down toward the top of Han Li's head. Wherever it passed, the void trembled. Boom! A tremendous explosion rang out. Han Li felt an enormous force, as heavy as Mount Tai, pressing down on him. His body sank, and his legs were forced deep into the ground, with half his body instantly plunging into the earth. However, after striking with that palm, the blood crystal giant's body shook violently and became somewhat unstable. He had to stagger backward several steps before barely managing to stand firm. At this moment, Han Li leapt out from the ground and shot straight up to the top of the cavern. He stomped hard with both feet, his body spinning as he fell like a meteor, charging straight toward the blood crystal giant. Han Li's chest lit up as specks of blue light appeared. The blue radiance spread along his right arm, causing his fist to sparkle like starlight. This punch slammed fiercely into the giant's massive fist. Rumble, rumble, rumble! A series of non-stop explosions rang out, as if mountains were collapsing and the earth were splitting apart. The bloodlight on the surface of the giant fist scattered, then shattered piece by piece, turning into chunks of crystal that fell down. Han Li advanced like a blade cutting through bamboo. His fists were like sharp knives, striking again and again, smashing the upper half of the blood crystal giant's body into fragments. The giant stood motionless, the blood light in his eyes gradually dimming, before he collapsed into chunks of crystal that crashed down, piling up into a heap of red crystals. Within that pile of red crystals, at the Dantian position, Han Li saw a tiny golden figure with dim spiritual light. It was clearly Chu Wu's nascent soul. It seemed that because a secret technique had been used, this nascent soul was temporarily sealed and unable to escape. Han Li reached out to retrieve the crystal containing the nascent soul, but in the very next instant, the nascent soul inside suddenly exploded. With a bang, it turned into a mass of blood mist that rushed directly into the remaining blood plasma and vanished without a trace. From the moment Chu Wu made his move to the moment Han Li killed him, the entire exchange lasted no more than a dozen breaths. This caused the 4 people still fighting fiercely not far away to be greatly shocked, though their reactions were completely opposite. Jiao 8 and Jiao 9 were both delighted, while the hat-wearing man and the woman in the black dress revealed looks of fear. A strange glint flashed in the eyes of the woman in the black dress. At this moment, she no longer entangled herself with Lu Kun. Taking advantage of everyone's inattention, her figure flickered, and she had already flown to the high platform in the underground palace. Almost at the same time, the hat-wearing man made a similar move, his figure appearing on the high platform right beside the woman in the black dress. In the next moment, the two of them blurred, then transformed into a mass of blood cloud and flew into the large cavern on the platform. Seeing that the situation was unfavorable, the two immediately retreated without any hesitation, not lingering for even a word. Seeing this, Zhao 8 and Lu Kun exchanged a glance, withdrew their divine abilities, and their figures flickered as they flew over to Han Li's side. Although the clash had been brief, the injuries of the two had worsened considerably. Earlier I was truly blind, and failed to see fellow Taoists' true strength. In the blink of an eye, you slew a loose immortal, Lu Kun said as he looked at Han Li, his expression somewhat complex. This time, if not for fellow Taoists' thunderous methods, killing one and frightening off the other two, we would likely have suffered greatly. I will report this matter to Lord Zhao 3. That's right. However, first we must find a way to leave this place, Zhao 8 added. Lu Kun nodded lightly, glanced around with lingering fear, and continued. Earlier, Zhao 16 used an immortal artifact in an attempt to break the restriction. Not only did it fail, it instead triggered those bizarre blood-light attacks. It seems brute force won't work. We'll have to think of another method. Han Li said in a low voice. Those two only retreated temporarily. Behind them is still Gongshu Hong. He definitely won't give us much time. A worried look appeared on Zhao 9's face. Zhao 15, back in Tianshui City, you were able to break that blood-colored space. It surely wasn't just luck, was it? Try to study this formation. I'll attempt to contact Lord Zhao 3 and report the situation here. Lu Kun thought for a moment and said, I'll give it a try. Han Li nodded slightly. Seeing this, Lu Kun's eyes flickered as the goat head mask appeared on his face once more, blue ripples spreading across its surface. Seeing this, Zhao 8 turned his body and began collecting the storage pouches scattered in the underground palace. Han Li merely glanced over, saying nothing. Blue light appeared in his eyes as he began carefully examining every part of the surrounding space. The ground in all directions was dark red with thick accumulations of blood. The remains of everyone were soaked within it. The 4 stone pillars and surrounding walls were splattered with blood, resembling eerie blood-red flowers that inspired fear. Not far away, the statue of the island master looked like an evil god, its entire body stained red with fresh blood. At this moment, it appeared especially conspicuous, making the underground space feel even more gloomy, like hell itself. Yet whether it was the walls or the statue, nothing seemed particularly special. After a while, Lu Kun slowly opened his eyes, shook his head, and said in a deep voice, Lord Zhao, 3 hasn't responded. This entire underground palace is somewhat strange. It seems the restriction contains blood law power that has been nourished by fresh blood over countless years, forming a semi-independent space. It's not easy to find a flaw. Han Li also frowned slightly. As he was speaking, Zhao 8 walked back and said to the two, Fellow Taoists, the storage pouches of the Impermanence Alliance members and the magical artifacts of those two fellows are all here. This trip was extremely dangerous, and what lies ahead is uncertain. Having a bit more security is always good. At this moment, he was holding several storage pouches, with 2 storage bracelets in his other hand. The 3 of them took stock and found that the accumulated wealth of 6 immortals was truly considerable. Whether spiritual pills, materials, or treasures and magical artifacts, everything was abundant. Divided among the 3, the shares were quite generous. Considering Han Li's strength and contribution in this battle, the sole immortal artifact among the spoils, the iron hammer belonging to Zhao 16, naturally went to Han Li. In truth, Jiao 8 and Lu Kun were not unwilling, but they did not want the treasure to fall into the enemy's hands. In the end, they made a decision that conveniently favored Han Li and gave it to him. Han Li naturally understood this. After accepting the item, he made some concessions when dividing the other materials, which caused the two to look satisfied. The three quickly finished distributing the spoils, then once again separated to search for a way out. If they could not escape this eerie underground space, they truly would not feel at ease. Han Li stood in an open area more than 100 jang away from the statue and activated the bright clear spirit eyes, carefully inspecting every part of the space. After recovering a bit, Jiao 8 and Lu Kun also separated on their own, using secret techniques to probe the surroundings. Time passed. The three of them employed every method they could think of, yet still failed to find any clue that would allow them to leave this space. Han Li remained relatively calm, but Lu Kun and Jiao 8 began to grow somewhat agitated. At this moment, a sudden change occurred. The entire space began to tremble violently, shaking intensely. The three were startled, but before they could take any action, the underground space suddenly exploded, completely shattering. Gurgle, gurgle. A massive blood cloud suddenly surged out from deep underground, abruptly expanding and, in the blink of an eye, enveloping the bodies of Han Li and the other two. Then the blood cloud rapidly contracted, dragging them down into the depths beneath the shattered ground. Han Li's vision spun as heaven and earth seemed to turn upside down. The blood cloud wrapped around their bodies kept sweeping them along. When the three finally stabilized themselves, they discovered that they had appeared inside another enormous space. This place looked like an underground cavern. Compared to the previous space, it was several times larger, but more than half of it was occupied by a gigantic lake. The lake water was blood red and viscous, with bubbles constantly rising and bursting. Every time a bubble burst, a curtain of crimson mist spread out, filling the entire underground cavern with a faint blood fog. At the center of the blood-red lake, a square stretch of land floated above the surface, forming a massive island roughly 100 li in size. Its vague outline resembled a gigantic plaza. At this moment, Han Li and the other two were standing on that plaza. In the open expanse, a colossal palace towered upright, surrounded by dense blood clouds. From the outside, only the faint outline of the palace could be seen. The enormous underground cavern was terrifyingly silent, with not a single figure in sight. Only the continuous sounds of bubbles bursting echoed from the lake. The two loose immortals who had fled earlier were nowhere to be seen. Han Li swept his gaze around, taking in everything within his field of vision. Just as he was about to release his divine sense to probe the surroundings, he suddenly let out a soft sound of surprise. Within the blood mist permeating the air was a strange force that prevented his divine sense from leaving his body to investigate. The expressions of Jiao 8 and Lu Kun also darkened, clearly having noticed the same thing. The two raised a hand and released their Earth-grade incarnations. Just as Lu Kun's lips moved slightly, about to say something, Han Li suddenly shouted, "Watch out below!" Before his words had even faded, the ground beneath their feet abruptly shattered. Several enormous blood-red bone claws suddenly emerged, grabbing toward their legs. The three immediately leapt up and hovered in mid-air, causing the bone claws to grasp at nothing. Crack, crack, crack! The ground continued to split apart. One massive blood-red skeleton after another crawled out. In the blink of an eye, several hundred had appeared. Each skeleton emitted a powerful aura, not inferior to that of a cultivator at the integration stage. The skeletons let out low roars and shot rapidly toward Han Li and the others hovering in mid-air. At the same time, around the island, the blood lake churned violently. One blood-red monster after another leapt out of the lake. These monsters had the upper bodies of women, with long hair matted with blood. From their backs grew a pair of massive flesh wings. while their lower halves were serpentine bodies. The moment these half-human, half-serpent creatures appeared, they radiated auras no weaker than those of the skeletons. They transformed into streaks of bloodlight and lunged toward Han Li and the others in an instant. In the blink of an eye, nearly 1,000 skeletons and serpent women had completely surrounded the three, packed so tightly there was no room to breathe. Seeing this, all three of them had their expressions change. Jiao 8 snorted coldly and made no unnecessary movements. The Earth-grade incarnation beside him released a burst of green light dazzling like sunlight. The incarnation swung both arms, and the green light around it shot out, flashing once before splitting into 4 green wind dragons that flew off in 4 directions. Boom! More than 10 skeletons and serpent women rushing forward were struck by the wind dragons and sent flying. Most of the monsters hit were torn apart and shattered. However, a small portion, though heavily damaged at first glance, were immediately flooded by the surrounding blood mist as if it possessed intelligence. Their wounds visibly healed at great speed, and within a few breaths they had fully recovered. This sight caused Jiao 8 to frown. These 4 wind dragons might look ordinary, but in fact, each was condensed through his use of law power. The might of every strike was something that cultivators below the Mahayana stage could not possibly withstand. Yet the bodies of these skeletons and serpent women were not only abnormally tough, they also possessed extremely powerful regenerative abilities. Lu Kun did not use his Earth-grade incarnation, intending to preserve his faith power. He waved his hand and offered up 8 blue flying blades. These blades swelled with the wind, transforming into 8 gigantic blue saber blades that spun and danced around him. On each giant blade, 7 or 8 faint light phantoms could be seen. In just a short moment, the 8 giant blades huan-hua into dozens of massive blue saber phantoms, slashing out in all directions at lightning speed. Immediately, roaring sounds like raging waves echoed around them. Within 100 zhang radius, saber light bright as snow filled the air, cold radiance surging skyward. More than 10 skeletons and serpent women struck by the blades had their bodies instantly shattered. Compared to Jiao 8 and Lu Kun, Han Li's methods appeared far more ordinary. He simply threw punch after punch in all directions. Every time a punch was unleashed, the surrounding void trembled violently. Any enemy that tried to approach him was smashed apart by a single punch, without exception. After just a few breaths, hundreds of skeletons and serpent women had been jointly eliminated by the three. Yet not only did the number of monsters fail to decrease, more continued to be born from the ground and the blood lake, endlessly surrounding and attacking the three of them. Han Li used the bright, clear spirit eyes to observe his surroundings while transmitting his voice to the other two, his tone steady. The whereabouts of Jiao 3 are currently unknown. As for Gongshu Hong, he is very likely inside that blood-colored palace. The enemy is hidden while we are exposed. If this continues, it is definitely not a good plan. Could it be that you've already found a way to escape from here? Lu Kun's expression brightened, and he quickly sent a voice transmission. Jiao 8 also scanned the cavern. Although this place looked ordinary on the surface, both of them could clearly sense that the entire cavern was enveloped by a powerful law force. Escaping would definitely not be easy. I've found a few suspicious spots, but breaking through them will require some time. These skeletons and serpent women are too troublesome, Han Li replied via voice transmission. Leave these monsters to me. I have a way to temporarily restrain them. You take Lu Kun and quickly look for a way out, Jiao 8 said after a brief pause, then nodded. All right, we'll have to trouble you then, Han Li replied. Without another word, Han Li immediately unleashed a series of punches. 7 or 8 invisible fist shadows shot out, then suddenly exploded. Boom! An earth-shaking explosion rang out. A terrifying force erupted, directly blasting apart the encirclement of skeletons and serpent women around Han Li, tearing open a huge gap. Green light flared brightly around Han Li's entire body as he seized the opportunity to pass through the opening, flying straight toward a location near the top of the cavern. The skeletons and serpent women froze for an instant, then all let out even more ferocious roars. They immediately ignored Jiao 8 and Lu Kun, turning all their attention toward Han Li and chasing after him in a frenzy. Jiao 8 snorted coldly, his finger twitching slightly. His Earth-grade incarnation once again erupted with even more dazzling green light than before. Rings of green radiance spread outward. In the blink of an eye, the green light covered more than half of the cavern space. Weng weng! Strange vibrations echoed through the void. Wherever the green light passed, the natural essence of heaven and earth became chaotic. Thin green threads appeared in the air, tightly binding the skeletons and serpent women, causing their speed to slow dramatically. Seeing this, Han Li continued flying without pause. In the blink of an eye, he reached a spot near the top of the cavern and threw out a punch. At that moment, lotus-like images suddenly appeared near the cavern ceiling, and two figures flew out from within. They were the hat-wearing man and the woman in the black dress who had fled earlier. The hat-wearing man did not say a word. He charged straight at Han Li and suddenly threw a punch. The bone gauntlet on his fist looked extremely ferocious as it abruptly burst with light. A massive ghost-shaped fist shadow shot out. Black light flashed in the hands of the woman in the black dress as a thick black wolf-tooth club appeared. In an instant, the club transformed into countless overlapping black staff shadows, forming a massive black mountain that smashed down viciously toward Han Li. Boom! A thunderous explosion erupted, as if heaven and earth were collapsing. The ghostly fist shadow shattered instantly, and the black mountain also broke apart. The bodies of the hat-wearing man and the woman in the black dress shook violently as they were blasted backward, slamming heavily into the stone wall at the top of the cavern. The entire cavern rumbled and shook. Shock filled the faces of both of them. Earlier, they had personally witnessed Han Li's battle with Qiu Wu. Although they knew his physical strength was not to be underestimated, it was only after clashing directly that they realized his bodily power far exceeded their expectations. Han Li's body was also pushed back 2 steps by the rebound force before he barely managed to steady himself. "Jiao 15, I'll lend you a hand." A streak of blue light shot over from behind. With a flash, Lu Kun and his Earth-grade incarnation appeared. At some unknown moment, he had already recalled his incarnation. Lu Kun let out a low shout and spat a mouthful of blue light, which entered the incarnation beside him. At once, the Earth-grade incarnation blazed with blue radiance and opened its mouth, spewing out 2 masses of watery blue light. Countless flickering blue runes swirled within the light, releasing intense fluctuations of water law power. The watery blue radiance flashed, then suddenly grew heads and limbs, transforming into 2 blue water figures. The 2 water figures immediately charged toward the hat-wearing man and the woman in the black dress, respectively. These rapid changes seemed complicated, but in reality, everything happened in an instant. The hat-wearing man had just stabilized himself. Seeing the blue water figure flying toward him, he dared not delay. He immediately withdrew the bone gauntlet on his hand and spat out a mouthful of essence blood. The essence blood turned into a cloud of blood mist and merged into the gauntlet. The gauntlet immediately burst with dazzling bloodlight. With a loud explosion, a ferocious blood-red ghostly figure as large as a building vaguely appeared behind it. The ghost's eyes, which had been tightly shut, suddenly opened, bloodlight blazing forth. Its huge mouth opened wide, spewing rolling waves of blood flames toward the blue water figure. On the other side, facing the overwhelming momentum of the water figure, the woman in the black dress hastily urged her incantations with one hand. With a boom, the black wolf-tooth club in her hand emitted brilliant black light. Twisting blood-red patterns appeared along the surface of the club, and a dark crimson flame coiled around it. She let out a sharp shout and swung the club into the air. Immediately, a series of booming explosions echoed from the void. A vast expanse of staff shadows like towering mountains appeared, each wrapped in dark crimson flames. Wherever the staff shadows passed, the void twisted and trembled, as if boiling. The two blue water figures almost simultaneously collided with the blood flames and staff shadows. Blue light merely flickered across their bodies as they passed straight through the attacks, as if that terrifying might could not affect them at all. However, on closer inspection, one could see that the forms of the two blue water figures had shrunk somewhat compared to before. In exchange, their speed suddenly surged. In the blink of an eye, they had rushed to the front of the hat-wearing man and the woman in the black dress. This is where this episode ends. Everyone, remember to like and subscribe to the channel to watch the next parts.